This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Tem Blessed and Michael LaRiccia. I hope I got that right. And we're going to talk about
Yes.
Planet Blue, the rise of, is that Agoo or Agoo?
Yeah,
How do you say
Agoo.
that?
Yeah, Planeta Blu, Rise of
Agoo,
Agoo. Yes, sir.
Rise of Agoo, graphic novel. And this is awesome because if you guys, well, people may not know, I'm a 56-year-old guy, child of the 70s. I was a big fan of Jack Kirby in the first
Yes.
100 issues of the Fantastic Four, and then the Fourth
Yes.
World, and then later, like when Frank Miller did Ronin as a graphic
Mm,
novel, and then he went and did
mm,
the Dark Knight Returns, and all that. I was a big comic fan. I read Cerebus. I'm a big comic head. I got tons of
nice.
comics. I love the
Yeah.
graphic novel format, so I'm totally into what you guys are doing, and the fact that you guys took this from a Kickstarter and got on Dark Horse. So maybe we would
Yes.
talk about that. But
Yeah,
that's a big
absolutely.
move. So what challenges did you face, like actually writing the book, and maybe you want to step back and talk about like what the book represents?
Yeah. No, definitely, man. Thank you so much for having us on the show. My name's Tem Blessed. I'm the creator and the writer of Planeta Blu, Rise of Agoo. And yeah, it was. I'm a hip hop artist too, and just like you, grew up reading comic books. Never really imagined writing one. I just was kind of like into my music, conscious hip hop music. Growing up with all the greats from Rakim for me is the GOAT, to Tribe Called Quest, Wu-Tang, De La Soul. Like that's the culture. That's the stuff that had me inspired. And so eventually when I had kids, always had that music around, but also was telling them these stories, bedtime stories, and realized that some of the silly, some of the animals that I was bringing to life in those stories. Some of it was really adventurous, and some of it they were really excited about. And I found myself kind of like thinking about it even after the nighttime, and being like, you know what, like I'm a storyteller through being an MC, through my music, and let me just see if like I want to write this. I want to write something. Let me see if I
Mhm.
could write it. It was always, the idea was for it to be a graphic novel. So when I wrote it all out. I was reaching out to some of my friends that were also authors, and they were like, "Hey, there's this publisher here," and so I did get an offer to put it out in long form, right? And I was just like, "Man, nah, this is meant to be. The vision is for it to be this graphic novel, this comic book. For those that ain't familiar with a graphic novel, this comic book, but it was all written, right?" And so eventually, a friend of mine, because I'm one of those people that I like to speak things into existence, but I also like to speak them so my community holds me accountable, right? Because I'm not one of those people that just talks the talk. Like I walk that talk that I do. And so I was like, hey, I put out albums, and you all can see them on, any streaming stuff, but I also was like, I can do this. I believe in myself. And the people that I'm talking with, the ideas, they seem to really resonate with them as they resonate with me. And that's, as artists, that's what it is. Sometimes you throw something out there, people are like, it's all right. But sometimes you see like kids be like, oh, there's dolphins in it. Oh, there's this kid in it that looks like me. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
all these things had me like thinking that, oh, I could do this. So this friend of mine, who was a neighbor of Mike's, was like, hey, I have my neighbor, draws. He draws really well. And I was like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I was kind of,
You
because,
can say that.
everybody has someone they know that draws really well.
Yeah, but vice versa was
Yeah.
my neighbor, his friend is like, I have a friend who wrote a book. And I was like, oh, man,
Who writes the book?
Yeah, they want
So
to
it's the
illustrate,
same
right?
thing, yeah.
So it's the same thing. Yeah, there's everyone's kind of like, so the proof was in the pudding, where I was like, hey, send me, like, do you have anything? It's like, oh, he has a website. So I went on that website right away, and I was like, yo, this dude is nice. You know what I mean? I was like, I think, because part of it is like, there's people that are nice, but there's not necessarily like, does it match, right? It's just like in music, you
Yeah,
might
to
hear a
match your
dope
idea.
beat, right? But if I can't really get on it, it can't really like, yeah, that's a good beat, but not for me, right? But when I saw Mike's work, I was blown away. I was like, this is amazing work. And I think it could match what I envisioned, right? And so,
Mhm.
So that was one challenge, was just finding the artist, because I was looking for one. I kind of
Yeah,
left that
yeah.
out. I was looking for one, and it's really hard to find. There's people that are like, man, you got this massive story. I don't know, like I'm a painter. I'm not, every one of those panels ain't gonna work. But when I met with Mike, first of all, he was dope. Yeah, he's a dope dude. You know what I mean? He's a family guy. You know what I mean? He's a
I'm
fan.
not so
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. Like, we're chopping it up. We went to the same university. You both went to UMass Amherst, and
That's
and so
cool.
there was a lot of things that were just aligning naturally. You know what I mean? And the
Lined
vibe
up.
was there. We connected, and then when I started talking, like, yo, how do we do this? And he gave me, he cut me a deal. I knew I was gonna have to pay. I didn't want to. Yeah.
We don't talk
About that deal. Yeah. It wasn't a great deal.
There was
You know what I
no
mean?
deal. There was no deal.
There was no
No
deal.
deal.
No, but he was smart. He gave me the introductory offer. He was like, hey, I
Yeah,
can,
yeah.
do the what do you call concept art, the concept art.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
actually do a few of the pages. You know what I mean? And then we can go
See
from there.
where it goes.
Yeah. So that was like the initial kind of hurdle, and then just the bigger hurdle. And then, I don't want to be over here just the only one talking, but the bigger hurdle was COVID. You know what I mean? When we
Yeah,
started,
how do you do that? How do you do that collaboration? Because like with a band, I'm a musician. I'm a keyboardist.
Mhm.
See all my Moogs behind me and stuff. But
yeah.
so it's like how do you practice with a band?
Yeah.
When during COVID, and if you're doing a comic book collaboration, if you think about like Lee Kirby doing the Fantastic Four, they were sitting in New York in the same room,
Yeah,
and
yeah, oh
Kirby would be
yeah.
doing the panels, and then and then Lee would write the dialogue, and a lot of the
Mhm.
plot, like Kirby was doing the plot, but they were talking to each other, to get Spider-Man and get Captain America, all those great books. That was
Mm-hmm.
a collaboration between Lee writing it, Stan Lee,
Yeah.
and then Kirby drawing it. And
Yeah.
that kind of connection you have to communicate to get
Mm-hmm.
that to work. So how did you guys figure that out?
Yeah.
Well, with the digital world that we're in, I mean, I felt like it moved pretty smoothly because everybody was, that we were all kind of migrating to this sort of virtual interaction at
World.
the time. Because we
Yeah.
actually, I feel like we met right before
Yeah.
quarantine started. It was
Yeah.
like right before that really hit. Because the
Mhm.
summer is when I did, the summer of 2020 is when I did all the concept stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we had just started that process, I think.
Yeah.
And we just got into this rhythm of like, was it twice a week or something?
Yeah,
we
we
were
meet
like,
up on
we'd meet up
Yeah.
on Zoom, and I'd be like, and I could just show them, this is what I'm working on, this is what it looks like, what do you think? And we spent a lot of time going back and forth, and because we work well together, there wasn't a lot of it moved pretty smoothly, and it was very productive.
Yeah.
With a lot
So
of other
yeah,
people, I've worked with people where it's like, wow, let's change this. Or Tim's problem is he likes to add stuff. It's not so much that he
to
likes to
add
change
stuff,
stuff.
you have
He's
to
like,
change these ads to
yeah, he wants to add more animals. He wants to add tattoos on people, or
Yeah.
add a different shirt or something on somebody.
Yeah.
Like put a hoodie on him now throughout the
Yeah.
whole book.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge. But
Yeah, I think it helped that like the story was done. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that sometimes when people are writing comics and the graphic novel allows for like, hey, this story, here's the arc, it's done. I know where I want to
The whole
go.
thing.
What
Yeah.
was great was Mike would flush out some of these things that I hadn't totally thought about because I had written it out. Although a lot of the writing was in my mind because I knew it was not only going to be a graphic novel, but I thought I was thinking about it almost like a film. You know what I mean? Like, how does
Yeah.
this?
So you had the dialogue.
Yeah,
That's
the
the question I
dialogue
have.
written with like the mood, the setting. You know what I mean? And Mike did amazing at like taking that and really illustrating it in a way where I didn't have to. There was very few times, like most of the times, I should say, I was like, "Wow, Mike, how did you how did you take
Interpret.
what like out of my mind and put it on paper?" You know what I mean? And then the very few times, what's great about Mike is the very few times where I was like, hey man, could you do it like this? There wasn't the pushback. You know, a lot of times I've worked with
Yeah.
people in the past where they're trying to convince me, you know what I mean? And although like I always welcome like the feedback, there was never pushback when I was like, nah, this is actually what I want it to be and look like, you know, or could you tweak it like this? And he was like, yeah, no problem. I got this.
Yeah,
you know?
well, at the end of the day, it's his vision. You know, he wrote the
Yeah.
book, and you know, he's given me this privilege to like visualize it. You know, so I'm always aware of that when I'm working on it. So that was sort of how I approached the whole thing, and I think that's what made it also one of the things that made it easier to work together on it.
Yeah. It was great. And I do want to say the last big challenge was the fact that here goes this, you know, it's all done. We reached the Kickstarter you know, the goal. Everybody's like, yeah, we're like, yeah, this book's gonna arrive on this date. We'll be mailing them out. And then, you know, the whole, the shipping, what do you call it? Like, everything was blocked. Everything's like, it's sitting on
all the printing. Oh, so you, even when you had all the plates done, or all the you know, because I like back in the old days when people were actually like, you know, penciling and then inking by hand and not by computer. They had like photographic plates, and you got to send them to the press. You know, Marvel won't go for it. But so now that's all digital, right? Or do you hand draw?
Absolutely,
This was all. This was all digital. The problem was the supply chain. You know what I mean? The supply chain, which was really tough, you know, to get around. But luckily, you know, we had great supporters, everyone on Kickstarter, and they understood. We all were living this COVID nightmare, if you will, and everyone knew, like, hey, like we get it. When we said this is what's going on, everybody got it, and then eventually when we sent them out, you know, people were loving it, which was a great feeling to have it manifest. And I think one of the things, just for anybody who's out there that can relate, you know, to get the box in the mail, you know, you get these thousands of books coming in, and you're like, oh, please God, let this like look the way that we had gotten prints, but you never know, right? So we cracking them open, and we actually have something online that's the actual unboxing. And oh man, it was such a relief and such excitement to have this be as vivid, as vibrant, as dope as we imagined. So yeah, give thanks.
So the Kickstarter, that was a big effort. Like, you actually met that goal. You were able to do it. You got that initial set printed, and all those people that supported it, they were getting those books, right?
Yes, sir.
And so did you do something where you signed some of them, or was that part of the deal?
Yeah, so what was interesting is we had the different tiers, right? And depending on the tier that you kind of you know, bought into or sponsored, they call them backers. So the Kickstarter backers, you'd have those packages where I would either sign it, and then also on the website we would have the different. So we had a hardcover version that was signed, and then the soft cover, and then we did a lot of, because the book has not only is it, you know, fantastic, you know, Afro-futuristic, you know, sci-fi mixed with just talking animals, all of that mixed in. We also did a lot of research around, you know, like they go to South Africa, Table Mountain. What does that look like? And, you know what I mean? So we did a lot of reference, and then we had a glossary in the back, because some of, you know, even some of the animals were named after like Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, you know what I mean? So in that spirit, you know what I mean? And so we put that in it. So we got to go and continue to go to schools, right? And schools are getting the books. So we'd go in there and we'd sign it, you know, and it's cool to have, you know, kids be so excited, because I come in as a hip hop artist. Like, I'm coming through with music and rhymes off rip, you know? And so then the kids are like, sign my book, sign my shoe, sign my shirt. I'm like, are you sure your parents ain't going to be like, you know, all upset? And they're like, no, I don't, my mom don't care. I'm like, I would care, you know, if I bought some nice Jordans, and, you know, now you got this.
Sign them.
You know what I mean? But it's great. You know, it's really humbling, and you know, we're so happy at how it's been received, right? To have even ultimately, you know, Dark Horse be like, yes, this is
Dark Horse.
Message, you know?
Before we get to that, like, maybe I'll kind of back into what it's about at a high level. Like, I don't want to tell the whole story because people want to read it. But maybe kind of give that, or maybe even talk about your influences within comics, that maybe inspired you to go with this? Like, who were your influences as a comic book writer? Like, what do you have like specific comic book writers or artists that you were inspired by that maybe?
Yeah, yeah, man. I mean, I was inspired. You know, you mentioned, you know, Frank Miller. You know, what I mean, I'm drawing a blank on the guy that wrote Spawn. You know, from Image Comic,
McFarlane.
McFarlane. You know,
McFarlane,
Spawn was,
McFarlane, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
You know, so
McFarlane
you know,
did
X.
big,
You know,
big movies.
inspired by X-Men. The Dark Knight, man. Oh my God, that like blew my
Yeah, yeah,
mind. You know, that made me really love, you know, Batman on a whole other level. And so, you know, and so for me, you know, I'm an artist too, not at, you know, visual artist, not at the level of Mike. Mike's on a whole other level with it. So for me, it was always the words and the art. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
so a lot of it, you know, when I was looking at the art and the words, it had to really match. And so, you know, so I'm a fan of not only, you know, all those that I mentioned, but also, you know, manga. You know, so even, you know,
yeah,
Lone Wolf
manga,
and Cub for me is like the epitome
yeah,
of all manga. You know what I mean? And you see even, you know, the Mandalorian be a derivative of that. You know what I mean? Or
yeah, yeah,
even, you know, yeah,
yeah,
Samurai Jack, all those other things. So comics were in my mind were the stories that weren't being told. You know, when I was coming up, you know, looking at the TV, looking at even the movies, and I was like, man, why ain't like these stories, you know, that I know exist out there in the world, that are really real, like that I'm finding in these comics. Why ain't they being shown on the screen? You know what I mean? And that was inspiring to see that people were that brave, that courageous, that violent, you know what I mean? That
mhm,
like sexy with it or whatever, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like the graphics really were what were, you know, connecting with me on a level that made me be hopeful that like, oh, stories like this can exist in the world. And now I think with, you know, the streaming, you know, from Netflix, Hulu, all the other streaming
yeah,
services, you're starting to finally see some of these other stories being told. And, you know, and always for me was the representation. You know, for me, Planeta Blue, when I started writing, because it took me 5 years to even write the joint, you know, because at first, you know, I still was putting out albums and I was just kind of like, it was in the back burner. And I was, you know, this was pre-Moana, you know, so going back before Black Panther became, you know, the
mhm,
sensation that
big,
it
yeah,
was at the box office. So I was like, man, like where are the Black characters? Where are the
yeah,
youth of
yeah,
color? Because we need to see him. I want to see him. I want my kids to see him. And there's, you know, millions of kids around the world that want to see that. And as we know, Black culture, all culture stories should be told. And
yeah,
we know everyone loves Black culture stories too, you know, just like we love the Italian stories, we love the white stories, we love like all these stories. But why is the Black
yeah,
superhero seem to be like, you know, all of a
yeah,
sudden you're a Black man, you know what I mean? Or the Black man, everything's like the Black whatever. And so, you know,
yeah.
for
Why is it gotta be like that?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
man,
gotta be
growing
like
up,
that, right? And so I was like, that was part of the inspiration. Was like, hey, let's have these kids. I'm also a youth advocate and youth worker for years. Still do it to this day. And so I'm like, man, I know these youth. I've been working with them. These four characters, a youth that I know, I've seen. You know, I've worked with. I've seen, you know, the silly kid like Angel, who's the brother of Lares. Lares is our lead. You know, she's Afro Latina sister, and she's kind of like the brilliant best friend that you always want to have. You know, the young woman, the, you know, the girl that you're like, oh, you know, if you need you need the answers on the test, you're gonna look at Larry like, Larry, can you help me out? Or like, you know, if you need tutoring, but she's solid, you know what I mean? And I know, you know, a girl that, you know, now she's in college, but when I started writing this, like, I'm like, you know, could Laris like do the things that she's doing in this book? And I was like, well, Jaylee could, you know what I mean? She was the young person that would always step up to the occasion, no matter how crazy it was. She's stepping up and she's representing. So I'm like, oh yeah, Laris could sit at this council at Atlantis and defend the whole humanity, you know, and that's what Lares had to do. And then you have Angel, her brother, and we all know angels. If you all know an angel, you know they ain't no angel. You know what I mean? You know, they might be kind-hearted, but they're saying the wrong thing at the right time, you know. So then that's her brother, and that's the kid with the afro, you know, Latino with a legit afro. And then you got Tomé, who's a Cape Verdean kid, and that's who I'm also Cape Verdean. So I know this character. He's like my son, but he's also me in the story. Another solid kid who has, you know, his own issues, but at the same time, he's solid. And then you got the kid from Indiana, the transplant, the white kid who's there also, you know, understands teamwork, but also doesn't understand the complexities of the world. And he has to go through his own learning curve, if you will, throughout the story. And so you have these four young people that just thrust into this, you know, apocalyptic type of story, and have to stop it from getting to a cataclysmic apocalyptic reality. And because of that, because of their unique characteristics, and because they understand, you know, teamwork and actual like a chosen family, they're able to persevere, not without sacrifice, not without struggle, you know what I mean? But they go through, and what's amazing about the story is there's, you know, a spirituality element to it. So not religious, nothing like that, but there's this power, this power, the earth, you know, some people call it the source, but in that book, it's Agoo, and it's really taken from the word in my culture, Cape Verdean, West African. Agoo is like, it's a way that we say like agua, but we say Agoo. You know, there's an island called Fog in Cape Verde, and they say Agoo, you know what I mean? That's water, you know what I mean? And so we know water is life. And so, you know, it's Planeta Blu, the rise of Agoo, the rise of this force. And this force allows these young people to connect with the animals, and they get these animal powers, these superpowers. And it has to happen kind of spontaneously, and it has to happen in a magical way. And that's the kind of the seed of this whole story. Yeah.
That's like the fantasy aspect of it. You know, a lot of Marvel comics, it was all because of radiation. Like everybody became a superhero because of like radiation. But then there's other kind of superhero concepts that maybe if you get into anime, it's more spiritual. People are more tied to like Gaia or the earth, or there's some kind of Shinto kind of mindset. So you're thinking about spirit animals, you know, nine-tailed foxes, all kinds of things, having a connection to mystery. So I grew up being into like Gotcha Man, which is like was a big you know, anime. Tatsunoko, I love Tatsunoko, like Speed Racer. I got into that when I was a child of the 70s. So the first anime I ever saw was like Speed Racer. And I said, who's that? And I found out it was Tatsunoko. Then I found out they had created superheroes called Gotcha Man. And I was like, this superhero team, they were all like, you know, they had this flying fire phoenix. And they had, think about Gotcha Man, they had like 100 episodes, they're all connected. And what I liked about the anime, and even anime, that's back in the 70s. But like when you get to like the modern anime, you have like Bleach and all these ones, they have these really long arcs. And they kind of lend themselves to the idea of a graphic novel because these are very long stories. And I think
you must remember, do you remember Robotech?
Yeah, Robotech, I was into that. I was into
Robotech was great. Yeah, that's when I was coming up. And that's what I think, you know, people are finally understanding is that some of these, you know, modes of art and expression, for me, I know that's when my consciousness went to just another level. Like I leveled up watching Robotech because, you know, before that was Force 5. That's when I got into Force 5 with Guy King and Grandizer and all of those. But Robotech, because of the scope of it, you know, and like you were saying, like these long arcs, man, you know, and they were pushing it into generations forward. And, you know, there was like a whole other generation, you know, second, third generation of Robotech. Yeah. That made me realize like, wow, this is, you know, this is beyond, these ideas are beyond what I'm learning in the schools, you know what I mean? What I'm seeing, watching on like, you know, the news or just regular stuff on TV. And it's like, wow, there's a whole other universe, you know, honestly, like it's a multiverse that we were getting exposed to at the time when we didn't even know it, you know what I mean? Which is,
American cartoons were like single episodes. But then when I was watching these Japanese anime, there were these connected episodes. that told these really long stories. And
Yeah,
then I was like,
yeah.
wow. And then I got into reading, I went to the comic book shop as a kid and I was reading like Dave Sims' Cerebus. And there was this there's like 300 issues and it's this
Yeah,
big,
yeah.
long, multiple arc, independent book that was
Mhm.
like, what we started doing in the 70s, like we knew there was Marvel and DC and Charlton and
Yeah,
all that.
yeah.
But we started going to the comic shops and then finding these like independent books. And we would go
Mhm.
read like Cerebus and Flaming Carrot and
Yeah,
like all these like,
Bottle
Dark
crumbs, stuff
Horse
like
and,
that.
Spawn and all
yeah,
these comic book companies that were outside and they had more adult themes. Like
yep.
they had like some comic books that weren't like approved by the code. So you
Mhm.
could see stuff that wasn't in the code books. And then you
Mhm.
get these deeper ideas, the more like manga, the more
Yeah.
like anime. And I was very drawn to the fact that you could watch these, the like Death Note is way beyond
Mhm.
anything the comic code would ever do.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you and that
Yes,
I like
yeah.
the idea that Dark Knight and
Mhm.
that what Miller was doing like with Sin City, like what
Yeah.
the heck that's a heavier topic than it can't be in the code books. So I thought the not having that censorship or just having the ability for the artists and the writers to write what they wanted to write and be fully actualized to their vision without it being edited or controlled. I like the graphic novel because you can
Mhm.
see the whole vision.
Mhm.
Definitely. Mike, what was some of your influences? Because this dude's like he can go deep with
Yeah, I'm
it.
trying to figure how dense I should get, but so I'm a child of the '80s, so I'm born in the late '70s. So a lot of the stuff that I was consuming in my very young years was more TV and like newspaper comics. So it was like
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah.
Garfield was such a big deal in like the
Garfield, yeah,
early '80s.
Did you get into Calvin and Hobbes at all?
Calvin
I
Hobbes,
missed
yeah.
Calvin and Hobbes for
That was
some
a
reason. I
shit.
didn't
Yeah,
get to
yeah.
that till I was in like high school for some
Okay,
reason.
okay.
But
Yeah,
like the Saturday morning
yeah.
cartoons,
Mm,
like obsessively watching that stuff. And so I was mimicking that stuff up until about the first Batman movie came out, the
mm,
Tim Burton movie.
yeah.
Tim Burton,
And
yeah.
yeah, what's funny about that is that I love that movie, right? I wasn't collecting comics and I bought Batman cereal, right? And they had a
Batman
rebate in
cereals.
it. If you return the rebate, you got comics, and those were my first comics. I sent in the rebates, and
Oh,
it
cool.
was these like reprints of old Batman comics, and I was just like,
Wow.
"What is this?" Like
Mm,
I hadn't been exposed to that, and I told a friend of mine, and this is probably fifth grade or something. I was like, "I read these comics; they're so awesome." And he's like, "You have to read X-Men." That's what he said. He was in
yeah.
fifth grade.
Yeah.
He's like, "Have you read X-Men?
Have you
You
read
have to read it." And so
X-Men?
I think I went to like it was like a spinner rack in a drugstore or something like that. I
Yeah,
got an
yeah.
X-Men classic. I
Yeah.
remember the cover
X-Men
and yeah,
classic.
X-Men classic,
Yeah.
and it was just like it was like a John Byrne story or something. But I was
Yeah, the Burn.
totally
It was a
hooked.
totally when they became that new group because their book
Yeah,
was almost going to get canceled, and
yeah,
then they came
exactly.
out Claremont in Austin, and Byrne. It initially was done by somebody else before Byrne came in, but
Yep,
they got at number 94 in Giant Size X-Men #1. They really changed the whole team,
yep,
and it
Mm,
yep,
kind of took what Kirby and Lee had done with the Fantastic Four to create a team that had flaws
yep,
was
yep,
was was brought to the max. But with the
mm,
yep,
X-Men, is they had these kids that were like mutants and they were like they were outcast and they still had this rich benefactor, so they kind of like had their own building,
yeah,
and so they had they had all this stuff,
yeah.
the danger room and all that. But what they had the flaws, they had the
mhm,
issues, character flaws within their own group, and
Mhm.
the fact they had a leader and Wolverine didn't always want to listen to the leader,
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah,
want
that's
to
just
listen to
dope.
Cyclops. He always
Yeah,
kind of fighting with Cyclops, like likes
yeah,
his
yeah.
girlfriend,
yeah.
has
Yeah,
that
I mean
tension.
that love triangle, even in the cartoon, is so
Yeah,
funny
the
because people
tension.
love that
Yeah,
the Cyclops Wolverine Gene thing.
yeah.
Everybody's always,
Yeah,
I mean,
Gene.
I always sided with Wolverine.
Yeah,
There
of
was
course.
no competition.
Yeah,
It's just
Wolverine,
yeah.
he was just a pure guy. Wolverine's a pure warrior, and the
yeah,
other guy is trying to be like Captain Kirk or something, trying to run everything. And
Yeah,
Wolverine's like, I can feel this. I know
yeah.
what to do. Kind of like
Yeah.
well, it's
like you
funny
think about Bang. Yeah.
because Jim Lee, who I was a big fan of Jim Lee when he was doing X-Men. So when they rebooted X-Men and they did it sold like bazillion copies. Like it was like the biggest thing. But they asked him like, well, who was his favorite character? He's like, I love drawing Wolverine because I'm short, he's short, you know. And that was it. I was like, he draws him so well. But I was like heavily consuming comics in the 90s. Like I would do my chores. My dad would give me allowance and immediately he'd drive me to the comic store. I'd just blow all that money and I was like subscribed to. Back then, I think I was telling you about this. You could subscribe to a comic. $12, you could get a full year of comics mailed to you.
Full year, yeah.
And so, like for my birthday,
I used to get a box of books.
Yeah, it was insane. You could just be like, for a gift, can you subscribe me for an entire year to Amazing Spider-Man? So I was like, subscribed to everything. But in terms of art, so as I'm digressing into this, what I noticed as I was getting a little bit older, that I was starting to really gravitate towards artists that really had a very distinct style that that was consistent. And so I would see artists like Art Adams, or just love his stuff.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And Simon Bisley, I was so into him. So he would do things like Lobo's Back.
Oh, Lobo.
Yeah, he did that kind of stuff, and like Melting Pot and crazy stuff like that. And then I saw Sam Keith's work. Now, some people remember him from the Max, which was an Image comic. I remember reading. He was doing stuff in Marvel Comics Presents. He was doing a Wolverine story. And that stuff blew my mind because it was so weird.
Yeah.
And he made Wolverine had like a big stomach, and he drew every single hair on his arm, and he was ugly, and his hair was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I was like, this guy doesn't care. Like he's gonna do what he wants to do. And it was like, to me, it was like the bravest looking art I'd ever seen. And it was a mainstream comic. And so I started really like gravitating towards those kinds of artists who had like a real like signature style. Larry Stroman was another guy like that. He was doing X Factor, and he would draw women like with huge hips. Like he didn't care. Like he was just like, that's how I want, I see women in the world. And it would just be like his style. And so that influenced me all through, collecting. And I would go and buy, obviously I was buying like for characters, like anything Wolverine was in, I would buy it. Yeah, but I was also buying all the Image guys before they were in Image. So it was like McFarlane, Liefeld, Jim Lee, and then they went to Image, and I was like, we're going to buy all that stuff now. And then it was like, I followed all these artists until, as I got older, I went through college, I started getting into more like the indie scene and like discovering Robert Crumb and all of these sort of
Crumb was like
awesome. Again, there was something like really
because I grew up with Weirdo. Yeah, Weirdo magazine.
Yeah, Weirdo.
I'm a child of the 70s, so I found some of those. Like when I went to the first comic shops before Image and stuff, I was reading like, stuff like Dave Sim in Cerebus. I thought his art style was unbelievable, right? That it was just black and white, but it was just kind of like a precursor to what Miller did in Sin City. What you can do with black and white books.
And also like the lettering, the type of lettering he was doing and stuff was crazy.
Yeah, he like a Bone, and you got Wendy Penny with you got Elf Quest. That was like this big long kind of sci-fi story that I was very drawn into. The fact that Jeff Smith, he did Bone, he did Razzle, he did all these weird characters. It was just always black and white. He had this very unique cartoon style, and he had these long arcs. It was kind of like an anime as a comic book, and it was very kind of character driven. They looked kind of like for kids, but the stories weren't for kids. The stories were, it was drawn in a really interesting way. And I was always drawn to people like Paul Pope later with THB and the stuff he was doing. I thought that he was had this very weird style, kind of like Ditko, loved by Steve Ditko. He did Spider-Man. He made him kind of ugly. He wasn't mock. He was kind of like weird gyrations and weird fingers, and he wasn't trying to make them all muscle bound. The same thing he did with Doctor Strange. He made Doctor Strange kind of weird. He's doing all these weird things with his hands and all this psychedelic weird monsters and stuff going on. I was really drawn to people who had that kind of Steranko, Kirby, Ditko, that kind of the very different styles within Marvel. Marvel had artists that had unique styles. They weren't all trying to have a Marvel style.
The house style.
The house style.
They had their own. They didn't have their own.
And
Yeah.
DC has a house style. But what was I going to say? Have you ever read Barefoot Gen, that manga?
Oh, no, I haven't read that. I should check
So
that out.
that's an amazing book. Is it Tezuka? I'm gonna butcher it. So that's a manga that's about the bombing of Hiroshima, right?
Oh,
When I read, so it's like, I don't know if it's like 20 volumes or whatever, but I'll tell you, like the first volume of that book, which goes on about this young little boy who survives the bombing. But the way that it's drawn like a Disney cartoon almost. It's that kind of
oh,
style.
so
Right?
he did Astro Boy, right? He did Astro.
Yeah, he did Astro Boy.
okay,
He did
yeah.
Rise of the Phoenix, I think is one of the huge ones. But yeah,
He has a lot of cool
huge
characters.
name. He did Buddha, the Buddha
Oh, the
series.
Buddha. That's
But
an amazing
again, like
series.
super serious content. So there's that to me is like blew my mind about like, okay, we can take this like really intense content that we really need to communicate serious concepts with, but we can package it in such a way that there's still like entertainment value in this horrible stuff.
Yeah, it's like
But
Disney level. It looks like Disney, but it's like adult. That's the thing about
but it
Japanese books.
resonates. And I'll tell you, that book has stayed with me for decades. Just like the stuff that happened, like that kid's story has stayed in my brain.
Yeah.
But you know, when you give it a first look, you're just like, oh, it seems like, you know, it's lighthearted. But I think it's kind of interesting to kind of handle material that aggressive, to take it in the other direction and make it sort of soft and easy to digest. It's like one of the magic of comics, right? It's like that's where you see you can really, like you were saying about the images of people they looked sort of like frenetic and, you know, they didn't look perfect. That's where you really utilize the benefits of the medium, right? It's like you can, you know, we could just make a movie to somebody and film them, and it's if we wanted it to look perfect. But what can we do to sort of exploit the medium and use it to his advantage? So
you kind of exaggerate. Like Miller is really good at this kind of exaggeration, and Kirby used to have these massive 2-page blow ups and things that are like way beyond reality. You know, like you think about Ben Grimm, the Thing, and he's punching some robot across the room. There's all these Kirby machines. It's like it's not reality. That reality is like way beyond reality. And that was what the whole thing about like the Marvel universe. I think people got drawn into it because of that kind of Kirby mindset. I mean, a lot of what their stuff is Kirby's mind. You know, it's like his mind to build all those crazy machines. What Wakanda looks like. That's a lot of Kirby's idea. You know, that's all his like, Kirby machines. People have all these over exaggerated kind of capabilities, but that was like the fantasy element of it was as a kid to me. I was like I loved having the comic books to go to, you know, to kind of get caught into it. It was, you know, something I would look forward to. Go every Tuesday, going to the newsstand and grabbing a book. You know, I saw like Miller's Daredevil before he did The Dark Knight. And he actually turned Daredevil into like a Dark Knight. He made Daredevil like his precursor.
Yeah, there's something really magical about books being able to, you know, crack it open, just the smell of the print, the ink. Also, you know, tapping into the imagination. What's great about comic books and the words, the pictures is, they're giving some of it, but there's still so much left to the imagination, to, you know, between the panels that your mind just kind of locks in. And then also you can get lost in some of this, you know, these images. You know, for me, Frank Frazetta did that, you know, with his stuff. But then, you know, there's so much, like I'm still, you know, I still go to the comic book shop, you know, to this day. And you just, you know, sometimes I just go in there. I usually always leave with something, but I spend, you know, sometimes hours really just looking at these cover art, right? And going through and just looking through. Oh man, that was
trying
crazy.
to find the next thing that kind of draws your attention. Because I was always somebody that liked to find a new book, not just for the number one, but like to find somebody that was interesting. That's how I found Paul Pope, and I said, well, "Who's this guy? This guy had this weird look. It's very strange." And I'm like, "That's a very strange look." You know, if you think about Paul Chadwick and the Concrete, and you know the Savage Dragon, there's certain looks. Some of these books, you know, like McFarlane in himself, like the way he created Spawn. That you look at that, you know, kind of taking what he did with Venom and
Yeah.
Carnage, and then taking it as like, well, I'm going to create something of my own. But he kind of saw what he was doing with Venom and Carnage, and then suddenly he made his own thing. And it's like, wow, this is something totally unexpected.
Yeah.
And,
What's dope, just to, I don't know if the point was clear, in Spawn, to have this main character be African American, be black, and his wife be black, and the best friend is black, not in the movie, but on the comic book, his best friend is black. And then, and it's not, once again, it's not like Black Man, it's just Spawn, it's just this dude who's a mercenary.
revolutionary.
Yeah,
that was,
you can
so
just
was Shadowhawk. Remember Shadowhawk from the Image?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That was one of the longest Jim Valentino. So
yeah.
they did that too. It was like, I think they were thinking like, how do we, this is a new company. Let's reflect the audience. Those were guys who go into all these conventions. They were huge in that era. So for them, when they shot up Image, they saw what the fan base looked like.
Yeah.
And they had that flexibility to do that.
Well, it is important to like if you look at the comic books, in the 70s and the 60s, like you said, if there was a black character, it's Black Panther, Black Goliath. Maybe Falcon, they didn't call him Black Falcon, but Falcon was the only one, one of the only ones that didn't say black. He's like Falcon.
Here
you go. You finally got one that doesn't say that.
Yeah.
But maybe Luke Cage. But then it's like
that's
kind of like. Yeah, but it's like where is the original idea, like a Spawn? Like, how come you couldn't have come up with that?
Yeah,
that's cool that you came up with the idea with your characters to kind of focus that without having to say it. Just I think that's important because some people, I think they would. Why do you have to put that as an extra characteristic to let people know it's a black book?
Yeah. But no, man, it's just fascinating to see where we're at, because for us, growing up, like having this go from the books to this $1 billion industry that Marvel is now, to see some of these characters come to life and to be done right, to see where Spider-Man, the multiverse, across the multiverse, some of this stuff that now you see from the first movies being like Spider-Man like going up like this on a rope, when he shoots the web, it's like a net that goes on somewhere, to see like these big budgets, and it done well in a way that and it's interesting, and I don't, the nuance thing is to have some of these kids, and I'm getting mad at my 13-year-old because I'm like, hey, let's go watch the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Like, it looks weird, and I'm just like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, because they're like most kids now, they're just spoiled. You know what I'm saying? For us, it was like they got so much. They're like, let's go watch Barbie or some shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, we ain't watching Barbie. Let me stop right there.
Get the weirder stuff, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I bought the books, and those guys were from like Northampton, Mass, and they actually had a comic museum, and I actually met them, and I had them sign my books because
we're actually the town next to that right now.
So, they had a comic museum, and they used to have guys come in, and they had a bunch of artists come, and they had them sign a bunch of books, at their museum, and it was just cool because that was like the independent comic era where like people were just putting out all kinds of stuff, and it wasn't like mainstream. It's not the Fantastic Four, it's not X-Men, it's not that, it's something different. It was kind of weird. And maybe the kids aren't as into that weird thing. That growing up with like Weirdo or things like Howard the Duck, like who would buy that today?
They're into weird YouTube videos. That's what they're into now. It's totally a different.
It's a different. No, it's why I mean, there was something always dope about. It's almost like a secret, right? It's for us. You know what I mean? It's for us in the culture. And then it becomes mainstream. There's something cool about that if it's done right.
Underground.
The underground stuff that's done right, it's great. But it's also it's such a wild place to be at right now. And we're excited because there's a lane, right? There's a lane, people see it. What we're excited about, like when people see our book, they say like, oh, you plan on making it in a movie, so that's
yes,
that is the plan. Yeah, and
Yeah,
we're glad
because
that y'all can see that, you know what I mean? Because that is the plan. Why not? You know what I mean? There's enough streaming vehicles out there. There's enough. They seem to have run out of ideas. Everybody wants to reboot stuff. Hey,
yeah,
here's
yeah.
a
Where's the
nice
original
original idea.
ideas? When you the thing is, the original ideas come from like the underground, right? Like if
Yeah,
you think about it, like
totally.
if you want to see something original, like you think about something like Bone becoming a movie, like
Yes, yes.
or so you get when you get the independent comics, they start to come. So if you take your Planet of Blue, to me
Hmm.
that's an original idea. Instead of
Yeah,
rebooting something like Green Arrow, just bring Green Arrow back and make him
yeah,
black. That's
yes,
what their new ideas are. They
yeah,
go take an old character and turn them into a different sex or a different race.
Mhm.
yeah.
So that's the new
Yeah,
idea. That's their new ideas. Like, why
that's the
don't you
new
take
idea.
all these independent underground artists and create like a Netflix animated series,
Yeah.
or create like a movie, like
Hmm.
because why not? Because to me, that's where a lot of the cool ideas. Because I watch K drama, I watch Japanese
Hmm.
dramas, I
Mhm.
watch
Hmm.
Japanese and Chinese
Yeah,
cinema. I
yeah,
was
Mhm.
always watching John Woo movies and Jackie Chan
yes,
movies and all kinds of
yeah.
stuff
Oh
I
yeah.
lived in Japan for like 2 years from
Oh, word.
2004 to 2006. And
Uh-huh.
I just used to go to all these places to pick up the manga, the original manga, and
Yeah,
I would read it
yeah,
and to kind of learn Japanese. But it was just amazing that you go on the subway and there were like salarymen, there was grown men reading the manga. It
Yeah.
yeah,
wasn't a
yeah,
kid thing. We were on the subways and these adults were reading it. It wasn't
yeah,
just for kids. That's where it
yeah.
has this perspective, and you see the TV when you watch
Hmm.
Japanese TV or Korean TV, you see a lot of spiritual stuff. You see a
Hmm.
lot of ideas that are not reused. They're brand new ideas. They're
Yeah.
like concepts that people don't in the West use to make a TV show
Hmm.
or cartoon. There's a lot of stuff that's very spiritual or science fiction or
Yeah.
like goth or this coming from a different place. And I like that idea that they're not afraid to
Yeah.
try those things.
Oh yeah. No, that's what's so important, man, is because we're sick of like the usual tropes, it's like, man, there's so many stories out there, stories that need to be told. And you see how people get excited, like, for us, it's always exciting when we talk about like, yeah, like these young people get taken underwater and they're put on trial for what the humans have done to the planet. You know what I mean? And and Lares, who's our leader, who's our lead out of this 4-person team, thinking of Fantastic Four. But she speaks with truth, you know what I mean? And because she does, the water vibrates, you know what I mean? And all the animals like, oh, she's speaking, with
True.
this, and it's just like whenever we hear someone that really speaks, like it hits you, you might even get goosebumps, and
Yeah.
for me, it's like, oh, like how could this be reflect? Like, how is she gonna really convince these
Right.
animals that like give humans another shot? Because as we know, humans are like the terrible.
They're
We're
the
bad. They're the
worst. They're the
worst.
worst creatures
Yeah, they're
Worse
the
and
on
worst.
worse.
the planet.
Yeah. And we
Yeah.
even have a
You found
scene
a way
there
to
where I was like, yeah, go ahead.
you
Sorry.
found a way to connect it. Like you found a way to have their powers like be connected to Gaia, connected to the
Yes.
world, and then
Yeah.
be able to communicate with the animals, which is kind of like an idea, an Eastern idea, or an
Hmm.
idea that's outside of Western culture. You see a lot in other cultures where
Yeah.
you have a
Oh,
lot of spirit animals or ideas where you're
yeah.
tied to the earth or you're tied to like the like the universe. So you have
Yep.
universal, like in Buddhism, you have these universal concepts
Yeah.
of like laws of
Totally.
attraction,
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big
law,
I'm a
cause
big
and
fan
effect.
of yeah, big
Yeah,
fan of like Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki stuff, which always is connected to the earth and how do we, help preserve or be a part of this ecosystem as
yeah,
opposed to
that's awesome stuff.
dominating the ecosystem and raping and extracting the minerals and basically like vampires, or basically like, the
Like
classic
vampires, yeah.
Matrix, like, like where, a cancer just kind of like taking eating and consuming till that you kill off what it is, like the body,
Yeah,
if it use that analogy of the cancer. And that's what we see now, I think, as as artists. I think for me, you know, and Mike, because we have the same conversation all the time, is like, you know, how do you do something, you know, for the culture? And I love that hip hop is saying that, you know, it's for the culture, you know, and it is. It's always been about, you know, keeping it real, being real, you know, not doing something like at no point is like, hey, we're gonna do this so we can get rich. You know what I mean? That's never been like the intention, right? It's like, hey, let's
was
tell the
authentic.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
that
know, like,
people,
back
you
in
know,
the day, just people able to
yeah.
take their rhymes and take the tools, like, take the 808s and the
Mm-hmm.
909s and be able to take the Akai MPCs and put something together and not have to have a studio. You could actually be in your room with an
Mm-hmm.
808, some
Yeah,
records, and actually start, using some samplers and actually come
yeah.
up with your own groove. And you're kind of like you did when Chuck D was saying, "Hey, are those sampled beats free?" It's like, I'm minding these things because it's something I can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to always be listening to De La Soul,
Yeah,
and I loved, like, De La Soul Was Dead and FIFA
yeah.
High Horizon and everything the Bomb Squad ever did.
Mm-hmm.
I was just totally like, that to me was like, I'm a musician. I play Moogs and stuff, but I respected the Bomb Squad. I respected
Oh
De La
yeah,
Soul. I respected original rappers because I
yeah,
saw what they were doing.
yeah,
It's art. Because if
yeah.
you see, if you can express yourself, and being into jazz, being
Mm-hmm.
into fusion, there's a lot of links now today between fusion jazz and bebop and hip hop. There's a lot of
Yeah,
people using a lot of jazz musicians and integrating into hip hop
yeah.
because it makes sense. Because
Oh,
it's
totally, totally. And all this
Coltrane
stuff,
makes it.
yeah. And it's no, what's dope is how much, like, you know, kung fu, kung fu movies
Yeah,
to hip hop to comics, like it just
all
all
integrates.
integrated and connected, because I think there was just this this awakening that was happening in these mediums that weren't, they weren't mainstream, but the people, the masses were all like, "Oh, these stories are resonating. This music is resonating." These movies that maybe weren't blockbusters because but we were like, "Yeah, we love the dub." The
Yeah,
kung fu
the
movies.
Wu-Tang,
Whether it's
all the Wu-Tang stuff.
all the Wu Tang, all the Wu Tang stuff. But it's so dope to be able to then also, like, here's the culture, right? All these
Yeah,
different cultures that the news ain't doing it, right? The news is just selling and peddling fear and wants us to keep us
yeah.
divided and keep us kind of like hating each other and fearing the Russians or the Chinese or the Japanese until, like,
Or the aliens now.
oh yeah, now it's the aliens. What I'm saying?
The
Fear the
aliens are
aliens. And
coming
we're
too.
like, yo, man,
Little
like,
aliens.
yeah, the little alien. But the little ones, they're like, oh, it looks like ET, and then people get mad, like, oh, it looks like ET. That it can't be real. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't
Yeah,
want
for
to be
real.
friends
ET.
with the aliens. We want to kill the aliens because they came to kill us. Like, man, if they had wanted to kill us, they would have killed us
Oh, they
already.
They would have killed
Like,
us a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. You see, really at peace. There was
They seem
Zen light.
really kind and nice to
Yeah,
me.
there you go. See,
But I was really like, I saw some parallels with jazz, like, Coltrane's Love Supreme. He used to, he's chanting that line, Love Supreme, as like a
Mhm.
poetic line. And then you
Yeah.
get the Sun Ra, like, Space is the place. He's like saying space is the place. And he has that song Nuclear War. It's kind of rapping. It's like in this,
Yeah.
he's saying this stuff. And,
Oh,
and,
hell
and
yeah.
there's a lot of examples of, like, a lot of jazz artists that use
Mhm.
spoken word
Yeah.
in their jazz, and it kind of lines up with hip hop, where
Totally.
and so I think that there's a natural connection there to see, like, yeah, that's I think that's an acceptance that there's a cross, pollination there of what
Mhm.
you can do.
Yeah, and that we're just building off of this other thing that's established. The only reasons we're able to do this is because all these other heads that came before us were doing it, and we're doing it right, because we knew we'd see some of that and be like, nah, that's bullshit. Like, we didn't support it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
even just get back to Spawn, the first movie. We're like, what the hell is that? You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
what is
what
that?
happened? Even though, might have liked the main actor, but everything else, and it wasn't until HBO did it, what I mean, as a
Yeah, we
series, they're
did it.
like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, here we go. Like, thank
now we
God,
got
like,
it.
y'all rescued it. You know what I mean? And so I think, people can feel the bullshit, if I can swear on here, people
Yeah,
can
yeah, it's
feel
cool.
the
Yeah,
bullshit, right? They know, we resonate. Like, I believe in that, like, this kind of, conscious, this mind that we're all connected to, before the internet. Like, people are all, you know, interconnected in a whole other way. And so that's what we always wanted to do, is have a story that would actually inspire the young people, would have, you know, even though the story is dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, like,
Mhm.
you know, apocalypse-ish stuff happening, but here's these colors, you know, and here's, you know, behind us, like these real vibrant colors where
Yeah.
you can take this in and take this information and even realize, like, man, although we lost this one, although this had to come through a lot of pain and suffrage, we will persevere. Like, we shall like, that has to be, you know what I mean? I don't want to give out
Yeah.
the end, but at the end of the
No,
day,
yeah.
like, the youth got to be able to feel like, or whoever reads this, because as we know, we all consuming. As a grown man, I'm still reading this, and I love watching, you know, these, whatever, any cartoon, any animation, whether it's
Yeah,
for
yeah.
adults or kids, I'm eating it up too. But we want people to leave in a place where, you know, ideally, at least from what I've been writing, is like to be inspired, just like
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of the other folks who are writing this stuff, where it's like, man, that was heavy, but we made it, you know, like, you know,
Yeah.
Daigoro's still alive, you know, even though his pops died at the end, you know, of Lone Wolf and Cub. It was like,
Yeah, yeah.
Daigoro still, yeah.
But you
oh,
want to be
sorry,
able
man.
to,
Oh, those spoilers. Yikes.
no spoilers, but yeah, but you want to have something that's inspirational and
Right.
uplifting, and it
Yes.
can be serious along the way. Kind of
Yeah.
like a Star Wars movie. You have the Empire Strikes Back, where the Empire kind of kicked their butt. And, you
Yeah.
know,
Hell yeah.
then it's
Hell
just like,
yeah.
oh, you at the end of that movie, it's like, oh, they lost.
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
they lost. It's like,
Luke's
what happened?
arm is gone. Holy shit.
They're done. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, how did you do that? But like, you come back, you know, the next one you come back, and then people are like, well, that wasn't as good.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it's awesome that you integrate, that you have the hip hop audience that you can kind of bring along into a graphic novel, and that's
Mhm.
also good for the kids to get into literature.
Yes.
If you can
Oh,
get a kid to read a graphic novel, then they might go read some poetry, and they might read some like short stories, and then they might read a actual, you know, get them into reading books, which is, you know, for your knowledge.
yeah.
Because everybody who's
Yeah.
into hip hop, you read to get your information, so you can be a better hip hop writer,
Oh,
right?
totally.
So
Totally.
so they can get
Yeah.
the kids into
And for
actually
me,
realizing, yeah, that you have to do
yeah,
that.
that was honestly, I tell people all the time, that's what got me into reading, was comics. You know what I mean? Because, you know, as someone who, you know, Creole is my, you know, my native tongue, right? You know, which is a mix. It's an African dialect mixed with Portuguese, because those were our colonizers. And so so I come to this country at 3 years old, and I'm just kind of like, you know, reading was challenging. It took a lot of concentration. And it wasn't until I found comics that I'm actually reading on my own, buying, you know, the Man of Steel or whatever it
Yeah,
is, and being like, oh, I want to, how is this different from the other Superman? Oh, this is a reimagining of Superman in the Man of Steel. And that was one of the first comics that I actually spent money on, you know, and similar to you, like, oh, he's not like a nerd in this one. He's actually like, you know, he was, you know, the football star. And I'm like, wow, that's a whole different, you know, remix, if you will, of you know, of Superman at the time. But the most important thing was I was reading, and I was like, oh, I actually can read this, you know, and it was being helped by the visuals, because it kept me locked
kept
in.
you
And I
into it.
tell, you know, the young kids that I still work with, and people, right, like, listen, what's great about this, because I could tell some people like, oh, it's a book, you know what I'm saying? And so I'm like, it's a book, you know, it's 252 pages, but guess what? If the dialogue gets too long, just look at the pictures, because Mike killed it with the
Yeah,
illustrations. You could actually just look at the pictures and the bold. I'm like, read the bold letters, and then
yeah, but it's,
keep it
yeah,
moving. You know what I'm saying? Until you get to a point where you're like, okay, let me get back to reading it. You know, but the idea is literature matters. The imagination matters. Like, we can't just
yeah,
always be spoon fed. You know, I
yeah,
saw, as a hip hop artist, as a performer, I saw like a shift in the audience, you know, going from people used to come out like, yo, like, let's get, you know what I mean? And then all of a
yeah,
sudden they're just watching you. And I'm just like, at the end of the
What's
show,
the answer?
and I'm like calling them, doing the call and response. I'm like, what's going on? Oh, it's the YouTube. And I remind them like, hey, y'all, this
Yeah,
ain't a
real
YouTube,
TikTok. Yeah,
show. Like,
TikTok
this is real
generation.
life. I'm going to be calling and response. Put your hands up. Let's go. When I say this, you say that, you know what I'm saying? And all of that, would remind it. And luckily, I'm glad to say that there has been another shift where kids are generally, because you're like, oh, hip hop is here. Oh, graphic novels is here. And kids are generally like, what's up? And then you drop the beat on it and the kids lose their minds, which is great. It's great that the genre, because it's words, right? It's spoken words. It's still truth, right? We're speaking about, and it's like we are saying, like people can tell what the bullshit is at. We all have bullshit
Like,
sense.
yeah,
Most
like,
of us, some people still look around, right? Like, is this cool? Do we like this? You know what I'm saying? But as long as the kids, what I mean? The cool kids usually are the artists, right? They're like, yeah, I'm messing with this. I fucks with this, right? So it's like, and then they get involved, and it is great. Like, definitely, please go to the Instagram accounts, Tem Blessed and Planeta Blu, and you'll see some of, the movement. We all have our own movements, and we're not trying to be the biggest, the greatest. We're just trying to do our part. I think that's what's important. I tell young people this all the time. Like, listen, you don't have, like, we're not trying to be, like, I don't have to, like, it'd be great to live in a mansion, have Ferraris, Lambos. But that's excess. Like, I just need one car. You know what I mean? I just need one house. You know what I'm saying? That's it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need, like, we get sold on this idea that you need, like, multiple and, all these chains and all this stuff. It's like, nah, kids, like, you just got to make a living off of this. That's it.
Yeah.
You know what
Well,
I'm
you
saying?
want to hear an authentic voice. Like, you guys have an authentic voice. You got original ideas.
Right.
And I want people to go to Planeta Blu,
Planeta Blu, yeah.
PlanetaBlue.com, and that's fully clickable when we're published. If they click on that, they find ways to they can get to the book, right? And they can get to you on all your social media, right? From there.
Yeah, you can even pre-order it now on Amazon.com. And it's gonna be distributed in a mainstream way after November 7th, right?
Yeah, November 7th it drops, man. We're calling it Planeta Blu Day. You know what I mean? That's the day we want folks to get out there, cop one for you, for your family. That's what's been awesome. Like, people are buying them for their niece, nephew. They're like, oh, they're graphic novels, and it's dope to get people like, oh, my daughter's into it. She devoured it. When's the next one? Like, there's people right now. When's part two? I'm like,
that's the thing. Once you do it, they're gonna want part 1, 2, 3, 4. So are you guys like into thinking about that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We had like a retreat, like, like 6-7 months ago, where, I mapped out, like, we got the whole arc, man. The whole arc is done. And I believe in that, knowing, like, how does it end? Right. I think that's important to know. How does it end? That's kind of like my writing style is like, hey, I know it ends here. I know these major battles or these major moments. And then I kind of like write the bridges in between those, and so there's, we thought it was going to be 3 books, and then we had this retreat, and we realized, like, oh shit, it's 4 books because it's that big. Like, this is a massive book. Like, we going up, because we got the water, and then all of a sudden there's some elemental stuff that needs to happen, and people are like, well, you're leaving out fire, and I'm like, do I have to bring fire into this?
Yeah,
I guess so, because that's one of the elements, right? And so it's good to now have a team, to be able to, like, suss out, like, where the holes are, right? Because as we know, it's important. And then the plan is, like, yeah, man, like, this is going to be a movie. I ain't even gonna say, it might be, like, it's going to be, and we're in the process. One of the forewords on there is by Van Jones, and for those that don't know, he's on
he's a big guy.
so he has the connect, and he's shopping it. You know what I mean? Right now, I got a shopping agreement with him, and so the plan is, like, let's get this to as many eyes, as many hearts and minds, because we believe it's a good thing. It's something that will bring people together and really respect nature in the way that we should. The way that most of us do, right? Most of us look at animals. There's so many dog lovers, cat lovers. No one wants to see any of these animals extinct. So let's do something about it, and some people, they're almost like, it's almost like they're blind to this reality that, like, yo, we could lose some of these animals. We could lose some of this beauty in nature if we're not on top of our game. And so we believe that fiction is a part of that also, especially if you sprinkle in some Afrofuturism where you see Black folks in the future putting in the work like we have been doing forever, and we're just doing it. You know what I mean? Like everybody else, we just doing our part. You know what I mean? So
I just want to add too, I think what's interesting about the book too is that we're sort of in an age of sort of being enlightened about things through technology, and we're finding out that some animals are more intelligent than we realize, and that we're finding this stuff out like on a daily basis. And I don't think it's completely out of the question for people to read a book like this and be seeing stuff happening in real time in the news. And we're becoming more aware of stuff that the book's concept of being aware that the animals have been monitoring the earth all this time and what we're doing, and they definitely have an opinion of what's going on. Definitely have been suffering, and they're not just like into forgiveness here. This is this is the thing. So it's not out of the question that 5 years from now we're finding out that we can talk to like squirrels or something. Rick and Morty.
Planet of the Apes might not be unreal.
I mean,
the idea
that stuff is happening.
Yeah, Rod Serling, when he did that movie, was kind of like these animals realized that like humans messed it up and they took over. So that was the idea. Science fiction kind of tries to show you that you could cause your own apocalypse, and then you're going to deal with it. And that's what that was about. I mean, Rod Serling wrote that. People don't remember that Planet of the Apes movie was a Rod Serling idea.
Yeah,
but have you seen that? There's this documentary on Netflix now called Ape Empire.
Oh,
it's all about like how like now we're seeing that the social interactions are way more complex than we ever thought. And it's like we're finding more and more to the point where we're going to get to a point where we really get it, and then we're going to be terrified to realize, we've been eating all these cows and chickens, and we're thinking, hey, they don't care, they don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, they're very conscious of their situation, and they're more sentient than we thought. Even at the insect level, there's more sentience than you thought. And so there's a lot of people don't understand that world. There's a lot of things you can do there too. But thank you again.
I'll give the second one, the second book with dealing with insects, because they weren't invited to the council this on the first book, and they're like, yo, what's up with us?
What happened?
It's gonna be tough because we're gonna balance, because people think insects are gross, right? So it's like, how do you find, and there's always good and bad, and like the mosquito definitely is gonna be a bad, he's gotta be a bad guy in it. Like they got no enduring qualities, you know what I'm saying? But the bees, you know what I mean? Like I am the bee.
The bees have a lot in the ants,
the ants, oh hell yeah, man. So it's fascinating, and we hope we could just plant, continue to plant that seed, just like those that came before us. They planted certain seeds that made us be like, oh, as critical thinkers, you have to just like look at good fiction or fact or anything, just and really break it down and be like, yo, like what does this mean? Because this is information I'm taking in. Obviously we're a reality where we're inundated with all the information, but some of it, as we know, we're like, damn, I wish I could get my, even a minute back, 30 seconds back, because of, but there's other stuff you're like, word, this actually fed an aspect of me, whether it's my soul or whether it's my brain, whether it's something that resonated with it. And that's the intention. Like, let's have this resonate in a way that have people inspired to just go, in the very least, to put out better art or be part of the art movement, and not just.
Well, you're inspiring other people. You want to, you want to inspire your fans. As any great creator, you don't want to be the only one on the stage. Like, you want other people to be coming up, and the people who read your book and listen to your music. You want them to be inspired to go and jump on the mic or jump on the pen and do the same thing and bring, continue this whole authentic idea of, coming from the underground, coming from independence. That to me is like, why I did with the show before we close is like always use this show as a spotlight on, emerging and independent artists from around the world in each genre. Multiple genres, not just one. All kinds of genres, from punk to hip hop to classical rock, jazz, anything. and just if people who aren't in the public knowledge space,
Mhm.
people I think people should hear, people should
Right.
view, people should check out. So I want people to check out your material, and then check that link will be fully clickable,
Right.
and I'll be ordering the book as soon as I get off of here. But
All
thank
right.
you.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
All right, y'all. Peace. One love.
Peace. Have a good night.
You too.
Too.